Gary.
Hi, lady. What's your name?
Hey, been forever. How you doing? Shoulder real better?
I'm still, let me fix your tag. It's trying to start raising a bit.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's still, that muscle still needs that sore. I just put some rose cream on it. I had a heat pad on it. 3 days or 3 nights until I went to sleep. My feet out from under me that quick, and I hit it. When I saw that I was falling, I break the fall just a bit, but I still hit on that shoulder. That's a few things about it. When I fell the last time, I slipped on that water hose, arm in like this to brace, and hit on the shoulder. So that elbow went in, cracked into the ribs. Straight down that hill, and it was like this. And when I hit, there's a little road there. When I hit that road, it almost flipped me upside down. Because when I saw I was going to fall, that's when I did this. Braced myself because I knew I was going to hit in the road. And it would have been a little more. I'd have been walking over the hill. And it's that hillside is steep.
Right there. See that select
right? When I came to this year, hey, you got a new gift box? I don't remember that color. Shows how long observant I am. You'll probably be shocked.
Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. Loving this winter weather, right? Come on.
Mark's you're the only one.
You may as well. We have it, right? We're supposed to be content with what we have and where we're at, right?
I'm ready to move to Florida.
Well, aren't they having some snow down that way now?
Yes.
Such as we are.
So you're saying your cup is half full this morning? No, it is beautiful though. All right, well, it's nice to be here today. Good to see all you folks. Before we begin our Sunday school, let's go ahead and go to prayer this morning. Anybody anywhere in this question question? All right, Steve. Ruby.
Remember me and my family? Remember the living sister? My sister? Her son, all the stuff frozen down. Remember them? Continue to remember him this morning? Remember Lisa Bragg? She had that
Church to remember our friend Charles Schmidt had all the news that he was his co-worker who said he was on jail a year later. He said he was not doing his job. Remember his family. Stopped his mom at church. My brother, in fact, all my brother, his wife, I came to Florida last night with him. But he's got something wrong with his stomach. Sometimes he's here. He goes to the doctor, of course, they say we need to see his baby. And we know my family. And Wanda's, my sister-in-law Wanda, her cousin died. I just seen her online. But anyhow, she had COVID 6 months ago. And she had recovered it. It was long term. And she decided her name was, can't remember her last name, but it's Greer Morris name. But anyway, the family's Greer and Wanda's dad was a Greer, so remember.
Anybody else? Go ahead, John. No.
My parents, they
Church will remember my youngest daughter, Carrie. Please. All right.
Church knew us. And my parents knew that. Blessed. Concerned about being as far away as I am, I can't
else? Unspoken prayers, I'm sure everyone does. All right, let's all stand if you would, please. Try to remember each other's requests, if you would. Ronnie, you mind leading?
Dear most precious Heavenly Father, thank you this morning for this day. Thank you for this privilege. All the blessings and opportunity that you allow each of us to offer our praise and worship to you. Cleanse us, Lord. Amen. All right, before we start, I'll also ask if anyone has read a verse or a passage of Scripture you'd like to share with the rest of us. Have something struck to your heart? Funny today? All right. Okay, the title of our lesson this morning is Abraham and Lot. Of course, we're still in the book of Genesis. That's what our focus is for this entire quarter, the book of Genesis. Everybody in this room is probably familiar with the old saying, the eyes are the window to the soul. Anybody ever hear that? Probably. Anyone know what that means or what it means to you?
Your eyes tell you a lot about a person.
Okay.
If you're not careful, the lust of the eyes will plant a seed in your heart that will grow and you will want.
Okay. You know, the saying comes from the idea that you can look into a person's eyes and get some kind of understanding about their character, about their nature, right? The window to the soul. If I look in your eyes, I can tell something about you. Anybody find that to be true?
Necessarily.
Not necessarily, is it? I know a lot of people that can stand and look you with all sincerity dead in your eye and be telling you something not true the entire time, right? You really can't go by that as a gauge. To gaze into somebody's eyes or stare into somebody's eyes and tell if they're honest or what kind of person, what kind of character they have. I think it's something that we would like to be true, right? We'd like to be able to think, you know what, I can tell a lot about that guy just by looking at him or her, and I got this all figured out. But that's not the reality. The reality is that there are people, again, that can just look you in the eye and lie like a cheap rug and never blink an eye, right? And you thought, wow, I was duped by all, and then you're shocked because you misread them, right? Thought I knew people so well. But actually the exact opposite is true. What goes into your eye is more, like Belinda was saying, is more closely what defines your character. We have to be, especially as Christians, we have to be extremely careful what we look at, what we use our eyes on and for. You know, what are you looking at? What do you cast your gaze on? And what do you keep your eye on? That's where we start getting into some danger. I had never really thought about this before. It was actually part of the commentary in our booklets this week. But the majority of sins that we commit come about because of what we see with our eye. You ever think of that? Most sin is caused by what you look at, what you allow yourself to look at. The things we want, things we desire, things that are pleasing to our sight, very often can lead to sin. Now, a couple of weeks ago, or a month or so back, we talked about, very early on, might have been the beginning of this quarter, I can't remember. Lessons sort of start blending together after a while. We talked about, letting sin go unchecked, what it can lead you to. Well, that so often starts with what we put our eyes on, what we allow ourselves to view. Think of, and I'm just going to give two great examples in the Bible that are just great examples of exactly this. Eve, right? Now she was told by God, don't eat of that fruit. But what happened? She looked at it, right? And she thought, that looks pretty good. I believe that would be good for me. And of course she was coerced along the line, but her eyes led her to that sin, right? This looked great. This looks like something I'm okay with. Even though she already knew that was off limits, she let her eyes and I would assume that she looked at it more than once before she took the plunge and said, you know what, that looks pretty good, I'm going to give it a try. What about King David? What kind of trouble did he get into with his eye?
Committed adultery.
Adultery and murder.
Murder too.
Because of what he saw with his eyes, right? Now, again, these two examples happen because they first look at them with their eyes. Was the looking a sin? How about in the case of David? Was the fact that he looked at Bathsheba, was that the sin? No, not at all. But he kept his gaze there, didn't he? And then he let the lust of his flesh take over from there. You know, if you look at our lives, you'll see that we're often victim to that exact same thing. Just like Eve, just like David, and I'm sure there's a lot of other examples in the Bible that we could use or we could look at. People that got in trouble because of what they cast their eye on, what they looked at. You know, we look, we want, and we do something about it. It's a progression, right? Looking is okay. We have eyes. That's one of our primary senses. We look at things and we take it in and we make all kinds of decisions and whatever about that. Then the desire starts, and then the action takes place, and that's where we get into trouble. You know, you think about, I'd say everybody in here probably watches at least a little bit of television at home. And you know, we are constantly bombarded with imagery that makes us desire that whatever it is. Now, of course, we've all heard the phrase sex sells, and that's used predominantly in advertisement. If I can appeal to your basic lusts, you're going to be apt to want that product, to do this, to do that. But it applies to anything. Anything that we find pleasing to our eyes, we're bombarded with these things, and they're not always good for us to look at, are they? The things that we look at, and don't even talk about the internet, you know, because I spend a lot of time sitting in front of a laptop, and that's my job. I sit in front of a computer all day long. There's a lot of stuff on the internet that we should not look at, right? And we make mistakes and we jump over a line. Now, again, we don't need to misunderstand this. It's our eyes are not sinful. It's what we allow to happen because of that initial gateway into our lives, right? If I see, or you see, or whoever sees an attractive person, and we are all, you know, we look at people, we find people attractive or whatever. It's not a sin to look at that person. God made us all. It's, you know, it's not sinful for us to look at one another or picture. But my reaction to that look can certainly be sinful, or yours or anybody else's. And it's not just people. It can be anything that triggers some lust in us. You know, as Christians, we're supposed to be discerning people, right? And we should be lining things up against the Word of God, right? That's where we make our decisions. Based on what God's instructions are, we're supposed to discern right and wrong based on that, right? That's where and if we're truly using that, and that's a tool I think that God gives all of us to use, and of course He uses His Holy Spirit to kind of guide us on that line, oh, you're not supposed to do that, or that's okay, or whatever the case is. But if we're truly discerning, one of the things that we should be learning very early on is when to avert our gaze, when it's time to stop looking, right? If we're following only our flesh instead of our spirit, then what we see with our eyes can lead us straight to where we're not supposed to be, just like we talked about when we talked about the lessons about sin. And again, this is not just people that I'm talking about and attraction to other people, but it could be anything that causes some lust in your body to take over. I saw this and boy, that looked attractive. I should be involved in that. Think of the vices that we see so much of today. Pornography. People, I mean, it's so prolific today and accessible today that it's a major problem, right? Where does that start? With the eye. That's where people look. It can lead down a road that people are so unprepared for. Adultery, like we talked about earlier. Divorce, broken families, broken everything. Gambling. Don't they make gambling look attractive? Think about, I'm not interested in slot machines. I'm not interested in this or that, but don't they make it to where you are? They want you to be attracted to that. Think of the lights, the bells, the whistles. Woo! How much fun we're having.
Now the big TV commercial is on your phone.
The casino on your phone. That's right. You don't even have to go to your local, little bar place to play the lottery machines. You can do it right on your telephone. They make all this stuff so attractive to our eye that next step is, what do I want to do about that? Am I going to take this next step, or am I going to back off and I'm going to turn away from that? Ruby and I were talking earlier about addiction, alcohol, drinking. What, don't they make it look all glamorous on television? You're watching, everybody sitting around having a cocktail, having a great time. It's attractive, right? It's designed to be, so that we are drawn to that, and it triggers the lust of our flesh to take that next step. I'm getting lost in my notes here. You even take somebody like a thief or a robber. They take a look at this object, they start calculating, is there value in that? Is that something I want to have? Or I can't pay for that, but boy, I really I should have that. Little things like that started with the eye and took you to that next step all along. So in our lesson today, we're going to take a look at two different men. One made a decision with his eyes, and the other made a decision with his heart, right? And then the outcome, as you're going to see, was very different for both of these people. Which one followed his eyes and which one followed his heart as we go through this. So we're going to read this. It's taken out of parts of chapter 13 and chapter 14 in Genesis. We'll just read through on in our booklet. I'll read the first verse, you guys read after me. This starts in Genesis 13, verse 5. It says, "And Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents.
And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for the substance was great, so that they could not dwell together.
And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled then in the land.
And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren.
Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left.
And Lot lifted up his eyes, and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Jerusalem.
Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other.
Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom.
But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly.
And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, Lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward.
For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever.
And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered.
Arise, walk through the land in the length of it, and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee.
And Abram removed his tent, and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord.
Amen. All right, so this starts out, and I'm going to call him Abraham through this lesson. His name hasn't changed yet, but we're more familiar with Father Abraham. I'm going to say Abraham instead of Abram as I go through here. Same guy. Same guy, different name. So, in these first 3 verses, 5, 6, and 7, I'm not going to read them again. A couple things are going on. So Abraham, in Tim's lesson from last week, Abraham's been given a mission. Go from this land, go where I tell you to go. And he did, right? He went. Now, he didn't go by himself. Abraham had a lot of stuff. He had cattle, he had tents, he had people with him, he had family. And his nephew, Lot, also went on this journey as well. Now, Abraham was a righteous man. He had a little trouble when they were in Egypt. You know, we see toward the end of the last chapter, right before where our lesson starts, he had a little trouble in Egypt. He was trying to save his own hide and basically offered up his wife so that they could get through there. Just tell him you're my sister. So he didn't want to get killed. So he had a little lapse in his, I don't want to say his faith, but in judgment anyway, as they went through there. But they've started their journey again, and they're south of Egypt, and they're moving around. And Lot apparently was about as successful as his uncle, Abraham. He had herds of cattle as well, and tents and people working for him. And pretty soon it became apparent that this plan of them traveling together just wasn't going to work out. They've got all of these animals, all these people, and they're traveling together, so they're all on kind of limited space as they're moving as one big group. So, you know, the bottom line was there was just too many of them. There's too many people, there's too many cattle, there's too many tents, they've got all this stuff, and they're all jam-packed on each other, and it was pretty clear that the land was not going to sustain that many people and that many animals without moving on. We got to split up. So that was kind of what had happened here. They were just in too close a proximity to stay in the same place because the resources were kind of limited. And then, of course, to make things even worse, what happens when you got a whole bunch of people piled up on top of each other and everybody's vying for the same resources? What happens?
Arguments.
They got little skirmishes breaking out. Abraham's cowboys and Lot's cowboys are doing cowboy stuff and fighting with each other, right? So they have a real problem. And obviously they weren't called cowboys, they were herdmen. That's me doing that. So, but anyway, so they've got this mentality, and they're having problems. They have fights going on and strife, they call it. And then, add on to all of that, they're not alone in this land. There are the people who lived there prior to them getting there, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. They're all there. These were not godly people, by the way. So, you know, Abraham, Lot, his bunch, these are followers of God. And these other people living in the land, they're pagans. So there's just all kinds of issues with them being as one big group in one place, all kinds of pressure within and without. So they have to do something. So I'll start reading now. So in verses 8 and 9, and they kind of go together, Abraham said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. So Abraham starts showing a whole lot about his character just in these 2 verses, right? And his wisdom. He's obviously not a stupid man. You don't see a whole lot of very successful men that are stupid. I mean, the two don't go hand in hand. Abraham is apparently a pretty wise, shrewd businessman, and he realizes this is not working. We have to make a change. So Abraham and Lot, they're the leaders of the 2 clans, we'll call them, the families. They get together to talk about it. And Abraham looks at Lot and says, look, we're family. I don't want there to be any of this strife between us. And I don't want there to be any of these problems between our people, our herdmen. They should not be fighting among each other. It's kind of unusual today, isn't it? How many of you have seen families break up, split for far less than what we just saw right here because their cows are too crowded in the same place? It's terrible, isn't it? You see it all the time. Somebody says something, somebody did something the other didn't like, and all of a sudden, we're not related anymore. I'm not sure how that works out, but Abraham says a lot about his character. You know, look, we're family. We should not be fighting. That's the last thing that we should be doing. I don't want this. We need to do something about it. So he goes on to say to Lot, look, there's a whole lot of land here. Look around. Look where we're at. We're going to have to separate so we have some room. So he's exercising some wisdom here. Now, Abraham, being the elder and Lot's uncle, could have said, I'm taking this. You got to go somewhere else. Or I'm going to do this. You got to go somewhere else. What did he do?
He gave him the choice.
Gave Lot the choice. Didn't consider anything. He said, look, you pick which one you want. I'll go the other direction. You go to the left, I'll go right. You go right, I'll go left. In other words, he left this entirely up to Lot. You decide, I'll take the other, right? In verse 10 and 11, look what Lot does. It says, and Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves one from another. So the ball is now in Lot's court to make some kind of a decision what he's going to do. Which one are you going to pick? And what does he use to make that decision?
His eyes.
His eyes. He looked and he saw stuff that appealed to him. What's going to benefit me, right? That's all he looked at. He looks up and he looks at the plains of the River Jordan all around there. He's got water, so he's not going to have to worry about water for his cattle. It even talks about that the land, as he looked at it, very closely resembled the Garden of Eden, the Garden of the Lord. You know, it was lush. There's a lot of plants here. There's water. There's all this stuff. And it also reminded him of Egypt, where they just came from, where they got into trouble, right? But now that's where his eyes take him, and that's what he looks at, and he made his decision based on what he saw. He like, yep, I'll take this one. I'm going to take this. And they separated right there. They went their separate ways. Lot decided to go toward Sodom, basically, where this was, because everything was appealing to his eyes. He didn't put any more thought into it other than that. He let his eyes draw him to. Now, was the fact that he made this decision to take that area, was that a sin? No, he's not committed any sin yet, but he's letting his eyes lead him. He's letting that starts to feed the lust of what he wants to start leading him down a road that took him where he didn't want to be, right? I mean, we know the rest of that story. That's not part of today's lesson, but it certainly led him to a place that he shouldn't have been, had no business going to, because he simply let his eyes and what he allowed himself to look at and then start building that desire for that. That's what I want. That's where I want to go. So, although he has not committed any sin yet, he's already started that process of letting his eyes guide his decisions. Now, in the next couple of verses, 12 and 13, says, Abraham dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent towards Sodom. Bad idea, right? But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. So Abraham continued to live in Canaan while Lot's choice led him directly to our modern day Las Vegas, Sin City, right? Wickedness and sin were the norm in Sodom. And I can't help but think, now we know that Lot got out of that, but it wasn't simple. And I'm sorry, I don't want to get too much into that in case that's like next week's lesson. I haven't read ahead or anything, but it led to some problems, and Lot narrowly escaped that, right? So, I mean, we all know that story, but the lust of his eyes looking on all this was very attractive. That's where I want to be, that's where I want to be, that's where I want to be. And what happens is you allow yourself to get a little closer and a little closer and a little closer to that line gets a lot blurrier, doesn't it? And all of a sudden you find yourself on the wrong side of the line, which is, Lot had his whole family there. And it was because he had based his entire decision-making process on what he was looking at and how pleasant it looked to him. So Lot used his eyes to make his choice. Everything looked great. I'm sure it sparked all kinds of lust in him for the land, for the people, for the goings-on, all this stuff. The closer you get to that, the more influence it's going to have in your life, right? That's why we can't follow our eyes when we're doing this stuff. So in verses 14 and 15, he says, "And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art, northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever." So, once Lot made his choice, and he moved on, he went toward the city of Sodom, and pitched his tent out there in the plain, in this beautiful place. Everything looked great. He went on. God speaks to Abraham again, and he tells him, lift up your eyes and look around. So we can sort of take from that when Abraham went to Lot and said, look, we got to separate. We got to go different directions. You pick which way you want to go. Abraham, at no time, was thinking about, man, I hope Lot doesn't take that direction because I really need that over there. That looks good. Abraham didn't use his eyes to make a decision to do anything until God told him to do it. Right? I mean, we can see God told him, you lift up your eyes now. Lot, that was the first thing he did, was what do I see that I want? Let's start working on my desires, what I need, what I think I need. Abraham did not. He waited on God's direction before he did anything. He knew they had to separate, but he did not make any decision. He didn't do anything. God finally said, look, I want you to lift up your eyes and I want you to look around. Every direction. Just look around. Everything that you see is yours. I'm going to give it to you. And you know what? It's going to be your seed, your offspring forever. This is theirs. What you see right here, this is your people's forever. Abraham did not base his decision on what appealed to him. He didn't even make the decision about giving Lot the first choice. I mean, that was really the first decision he made was, look, we've got to separate. How are we going to do this? I'll let Lot make the choice, which way he wants to go. His nephew, he didn't. He did not rely on what he was looking at to make any kind of a choice. His whole decision was, you know what, I'm going to let Lot pick what he wants. When you put somebody else first, isn't that closer to being what God wants us to be all the time? Putting somebody else's needs, somebody else's wants, somebody else, period, before ourselves. Isn't that the very definition of love? Is putting someone else before ourselves? Not the warm and fuzzy feeling, emotion, love, but I'm actively loving somebody. Look, I want what's best for Mason. I want Mason to have. Let you pick. You do whatever. And that's what these two men, or that's what Abraham did. And you know what? God rewarded him for that. God rewarded him because Abraham did not make a decision, did not approach this selfishly. He did it selflessly, right? And isn't that part of Christianity as well? More Christ, less me. So you can see that this is the nature of Abraham, of what he's doing. The way he treats people, and I'm sure that's why he was probably such a successful man with the power and the riches that he had, all the possessions that he had, was because he had made wise decisions, and as we know, based on what God would have him to do. So anyway, God rewarded him beyond measure for that decision, did he not? I mean, did Abraham's seed last forever? We're sitting here, aren't we? Aren't we part of Abraham's seed now? We are all adopted into that same family as Christians. So Lot's problems started festering the minute he let his lust for what he saw with his eyes make his decision for him. He did not have an easy time going forward, did he? He went into Sodom, and I'm not trying to teach that lesson because I did not read ahead. I'm afraid I'm stepping on the next lesson. But he saw lots of pretty people. He saw lots of pretty stuff, and this all looks great. Ooh, we need to hang around with these guys. Bad choice, and he got in a lot of trouble because of it. So anyway, trying to get back on track with my notes. All right, so let's read the last couple of verses here, 17 and 18. He says, I skipped a verse here somewhere, 16. He says, "Arise, walk through the land in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee." Then Abraham removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, whatever how you pronounce that, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. So God tells Abram, look around. I want you to walk and check out your land. I want you to explore. Roam this. Go check it out. Remember, Abraham had not cast his eye. Oh, man, there's some water over there. Oh, there's a nice place to do this over here. He had not used his eyes to make any decisions. He was just simply following, you know what, God told me I could have this. This is great. Didn't matter what it looked like. Didn't matter what was on there. God gave it to him. And he was pleased with that. But God tells him, look, I want you to go explore all this. Everything you see here is yours. All this land is yours to your seed. So Abraham moved his tent to Mamre. And what was the first thing he did when he got there? Built an altar unto the Lord. Again, here's a man who is not basing his decisions on his senses. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Is he's not doing it because, wow, this looked great. That's where I want to go. Here's this. In everything that he does that we see him going, he considers God. He seems to anyway. And all the choices, all the decisions that he makes, at the very least when he gets where he's going, he makes sure to recognize God, to acknowledge God, to give thanks to God. He built an altar to God. I only have this because of God. Do we see anywhere where when Lot got to his place, where he was going, he put up an altar and said, man, I'm here because of God? That's not part of the story, is it? We don't see that anywhere because Lot found himself in a lot of trouble. But Abraham did not. Now, that's all the text we have from what we have this morning, but let's think about this for just a minute. So, we all have eyes, and as we were talking earlier before Sunday school this morning, some of us see a little better than others. I was telling a story about, since we've got a few minutes here, I was telling a story I had to go to DMV to get my driver's license renewed back in the middle of December. I waited until the day before mine expired because I like to put stuff off as long as I can, get all my money's worth out of my driver's license. So since the pandemic started, I have worn no corrective lenses, which I'm supposed to. No glasses, no contacts. I tried wearing my glasses before I went, and they're so outdated, it was worse than having no glasses on. I haven't had a contact, and I had an eye exam scheduled for like March of 2020 when the pandemic started. Of course, it got canceled. I never rescheduled it, and I'm just going around no glasses, no contacts. So I start freaking out because I got to take an eye exam. So here I am with my eyes, and the lady at the DMV says, "Okay, look here," and I'm like, as soon as I put my face to that thing, I'm in trouble. They're going to send me home. She goes, okay, I need you to read. And I'm like, all of it? She said, no, I need you to look at row 3 and read everything on row 3. And then I start squinting. I'm really in trouble. And thankfully, she couldn't see how bad I was squinting to see anything. So I start, this kind of number. And finally, things start kind of clearing up just a tad. I just read it real fast, the whole row. And I missed one letter, but she passed me. So she said, yeah, you're good. But when we rely on our eyes to make decisions, which I should have relied more on a doctor in that case, we get into trouble. But looking itself is not the sin. Looking is not the problem. God gave us these eyes. He wants us to look. You know, we can look around and we can appreciate the beauty that God's created. Whether it's this majestic, this beautiful snow that we have out here. I know you guys are all in love with that. The snow, come on now, Mason. The snow we have, you know, the things that we see in the world, people that we see. God created people. You know what? I appreciate looking at somebody I find attractive. Or people are nice, you know. But when we start going beyond and making choices based on what our eyes see or what we take into our eyes, we can end up in a lot of trouble. All that looks good to us is not necessarily good for us, right? There's just a whole lot of things that can happen because of that. This was a direct warning of just that, following your eyes. The eyes are not the windows to the soul, but they're the gateway to what comes in to your body, into your mind, and even into your heart. And if we're not very, very careful, we can make the wrong decisions based on that. All right, I'm done.